it kind of gives us a little bit more trust and faith here that this team is going to be able to manage them to have them effectively help out in these games that actually matter. Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live for Wednesday, July the 24th. Filling in for the Director of Published Content here at Broadway Sports Media. It's none other than me, producer JT. I've seized the means of Hot Read production. Easton is gone. See you later. But now I will be pulling double duty today, producer and host of this show, but not just by myself today, because I am joined by the lovely Stoney Keeley of Sobros Network and StackingTheInbox.com. Stoney, how are you doing today?
I don't know about you, JT, but I am so freaking stoked. And yes, I censored myself because I still have respect for the Hot Read brand, though Easton's
Thank you very much.
Here.
Yes.
I am so freaking stoked over this press conference today. And I think it's just me being excited that football is back. But I'm more excited that we finally, after all these months, we get to give the people what they want. They get the JT and Stoney show today.
That's what I was thinking about. You know how like take the Fast and Furious movies, for example. You know, they have like so many movies and then they finally are like, let's just do some like spinoffs. Like, I feel like this show with us on it right now, this is the Hobbs and Shaw of the Hot Read Podcast. This is the perfect spinoff. It's the nice palate cleanser, we didn't even really talk about why Easton isn't here, but it's a nice palate cleanser right before we get into the meat and potatoes of football season. I think people are going to really, really enjoy that.
You know what? I will give you points for the analogy, but Hobbs and Shaw was a terrible movie.
Was it? I've never seen it. I just thought it was, I was like, what's like the most recent like spinoff? It was pretty bad. Okay.
So here's where I would go with it. It's like people have been talking about Universal wanting a Fast and Furious Jurassic Park crossover. And everybody's like, whoa, yes, that is insane. Today, this is like the Nashville Sports Podcast version of them actually making the Jurassic Park Fast and Furious crossover. That's what this is like.
And you know what? There's not a better day to do this. Officially football is back, like you said. Excited. I was there at St. Thomas Ascension Sports Park today for the press conferences of both Brian Callahan and Rand Carthen and company. A lot was said there today, and we're going to dive into all of it. But before we get into that, a couple of things. If you are on Facebook or Twitter, and of course, we are still only going live on Easton's Twitter and 440 Twitter because I hate Twitter, and it won't let me live stream on the places I want to live stream, even though I tried to go back in and they were like, you need a premium account to live stream on this. So I upgraded. I bought more I gave more money to Elon Musk and it still won't let me do it. So if you're watching on one of those two, do me a favor and go over to the Broadway Sports Media YouTube channel or the 440 Sports YouTube channel so that you can join the conversation like so many of you are in here. D Good, Chef Ran, Conte, and let's see who else is in here. Eddie Terrell. Yeah. Here we are joining the conversation today as we get into this. But I think we should, as Chef Ran says here in the comments, Easton a baby daddy yet? We should probably address why Easton isn't here. I know that right after the press conferences, Easton said, it may be time. It may be that time. So he and his wife headed to the hospital. But once again, I think this is their second false alarm. He's apparently talking to all these doctors and they're like, yeah, we have no idea, man. Like this baby it might be time. It might not. They have no idea. So I don't think he's a baby daddy just yet. But, anytime right now, like it could happen later on today. It could happen tomorrow. But, we're going to keep on trucking here. He was also there, got some footage as well today. So we both were there and we're just going to jump right into it today. A lot of things to get to. And I think it was really important. As Easton says, even when I'm away, I'm always watching. Great.
Hey, we gotta give Easton his due. Okay. We had the show at Memos. It was 2 weeks ago at this point, I think. Yeah. He was on Baby Watch then. That man was live on the air, drove all the way out to Mount Juliet to do the show with us, checking his phone. And we see him get up during dinner. We're all kind of chumming it up, having a good time after the show. and Easton gets up and darts out the door, and we're like, it could be go time at any moment. And this man is still making it a priority to be here for the Hot Read podcast at Memos. This guy, you want to talk about love of the game, give Easton his due.
Yes, for sure. And now when the content is more juicy than ever and it's fresh, he decides to then walk away from it. So it's a double-edged sword for him. But yes, he is as committed to the grind as any of us, and it was very much of a grind because it was a lot of just information that they were throwing at us today from Brian Callahan and Rand Carthen. And we can jump right into the first part of what Brian Callahan kind of came out here and said today. He wanted to get first things first, here's who's going to be with us at the start of training camp, who is not, who's going to be on the physically unable to perform list. And it was a pretty short list, but I think one of the two is an interesting conversation to have. We do also have the clip, so we'll be playing it here, but we can just talk about it first as Colton Dow will start on the physically unable to perform list. I think that was, one of those that wasn't surprising. What about him this kind of through OTAs and this offseason, it's really been much of the same that, he still has a ways to go before he can even see the field. And then Brian Callahan added another note to the list of people who are going to be on the physically unable perform list. And we can play the clip now where he talks and dives a little bit more in depth to it.
PUP players that'll start out that way will be Colton Dow, obviously, he'd be on reserve PUP to start, still coming off his ACL. And then MPF will be on the active PUP, which should be, a couple of days as we start. So just to clarify for him, just so everybody's on the same page, his injury is not, his PUP is not related to his shoulder. His shoulder has been cleared, it's healed. It's related to a cleanup. He had a cleanup surgery in the offseason after the first couple of weeks of our program, and had a little issue to clean up, and really that's what that is. And so he's just coming off of that. Should be good in a few days' time, but he'll start officially on the active PUP. So other than that, everyone else is cleared and healthy and ready to roll. So we're in a pretty good place health-wise. We'll have some guys that we manage over the course of training camp in terms of load and guys that are a little bit older and all that stuff. But other than that, we're healthy going into camp, which is where you want to be, and I'm excited to get rolling. So it looks.
So NPF is starting on the active PUP for this Titans team, which I think was a little bit of a surprise considering that through OTAs we kept hearing that he's nearing a return. And now it was important to note that Brian Callahan also did clarify, like he said there, that it was a cleanup procedure on his knee, not the shoulder. The shoulder is cleared medically to go. It was a cleanup on his knee, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I think it does bring up an interesting discussion that we kind of talked about last week on our show. Who has the most to gain in this right tackle race for the offensive line? And I think one of the biggest points that I tried to make last week is that if MPF doesn't, he may be in the pole position right now, but if he doesn't get off to a good start, I feel like that gap between him and everybody else who may be vying for that spot, whether it's Leroy Watson, John Njoku, anybody else who might want to try and get Guron Christian, all these guys who may have a shot to get the right tackle position, I think that gap closes pretty fast if he's not able to get off on a good foot, especially when, everything starts to go and the pavement, you hit the pavement running and everybody's off to the races. NPF not being out there that first week or so is, from what it sounds like, is I think a big deal.
Yeah, and I think the thing that concerns me, I don't know how you feel about this, JT. Would you be, I'll ask you, would you be more or less concerned if this was because of the shoulder injury? Because I don't know how to process, well, if the shoulder's just still not ready, maybe that's one thing, but the fact that there's something else going on that even required cleanup to begin with, I don't know. I don't know enough about the situation to have like a firm opinion on it, but my gut just reaction, emotional response in the moment is like, dang, he has something else going on that's keeping him from getting on the field. That's a little more concerning to me. How did you process that aspect of what Brian Callahan said there?
It is mildly concerning, that these kind of things are going to keep him continuously off the field. When you talk about guys like Leroy Watson and John Njoku and Jalen Duncan, who have been there every single day and already have started kind of building that chemistry out on the field with Bill Callahan. It sounds to me like in this scenario, MPF has really not been able to do a lot of the things that these other guys vying for those spots have been able to do. And we're still just kicking the can down the road until MPF is full and ready to go. And so while Brian Callahan may shrug it off like it's no worry, I think that, with what he said today, and what you kind of said, these kind of different injuries, even before the season starts, are going to add up. And so is NPF, who is in the pole position, deserving of that spot, despite maybe at a moment's notice having another nagging injury like come up? And as Chef Rand says, sounded like it was a cleanup on the shoulder. No, that's what we initially thought. And then Paul Kaharski thought to ask later on and asked, so was it a cleanup on the shoulder or was it something else? And then Brian goes back and says, the shoulder is medically cleared, but this was on his knee. So he has a little bit of nagging knee injury that needed surgery to clean up. And then he said the shoulder was good to go regardless. But I think that does bring up a point that all of these injuries continue to just stack up. And so what's the point where we may see him only be out there a couple times over the next week and still feel confident that he can win the right tackle spot? I think there are some other guys who have been there, who have been putting in the work, have been trying to build some sort of, connection with the rest of their line, the chemistry there, who I think have a real chance to, starting tomorrow, come out there and prove that they are the guy to beat.
Yeah, so I'm glad I'm not alone in thinking, like, just perking up a little bit at that, like, oh, it's not the shoulder. We've got something else going on here. I don't know, JT. You say NPF is in the pole position. I'm not at training camp like you guys are, or I'm not at the OTAs like you guys are. I have had my tinfoil hat on all spring, ever since I found out that John Njoku was getting the reps with the first team at right tackle. I think it's his job to lose, and I think NPF was the main contender to that spot, and now I think this might put a little bit of separation between the two. But I think Brian Callahan also threw an interesting wrinkle into this conversation at his press conference today, too, when he started talking about Jerron Christian and Leroy Watson and how a lot of the depth guys are being trained for both sides. So it does kind of make me think, and Chef Rand brings up Jerron Christian, too, and Leroy Watson, is that, they might be in play at right tackle. Initially, we heard Leroy Watson was at left tackle during OTAs, backing up J.C. Latham. But I think, it's certainly possible in a situation where this sounds like it's just going to be an open competition, that it could really be anybody's ball game. And I'm not so sure that NPF is in a spot right now where he's going to stake that claim outright early on. I kind of feel I'm still kind of riding the Njoku train, and maybe that's just me lost in my own sauce, but I'm with it, man.
I think it's a fair point to make there that, because we haven't seen him, I think that when I say that NPF is still in the pole position, it comes from not the results that we've seen, but rather from what we've heard from Bill Callahan himself. It seems like Bill Callahan wants, like, he is trying his hardest to hold on to NPF is going to be the right tackle. But as much as Bill Callahan probably gets final say, you can't ignore the fact that he continues to miss more and more time. And I think that at some point it's going to tip over and lead to other avenues, like you said, like a John Njoku, who has looked pretty good out there. Another guy like Leroy Watson, who, he prides himself on his versatility. When we talked to him, that was one of the things he said was his favorite part about his game, or what separates him from the rest. And that connection that he has, Bill Callahan, I think may come into play here as we get deeper into training camp.
And I'm glad you said that, because there were some interesting comments today about Watson and Christian both having familiarity under Bill Callahan and kind of being the elder statesman in the room. And it does kind of make me think that this staff is leaning towards a more experienced right tackle. Maybe they don't like the idea of John Njoku going out there, Jalen Duncan going out there. and they want NPF to be that guy because he is experienced in the NFL, not under Bill Callahan, but he is experienced in the NFL. And then you have guys in Watson and Christian that have had real reps and meaningful NFL action under Bill Callahan. It kind of strikes me as, maybe they want someone with experience in that role, and that may be the ultimate demise of Ojukwu Mania, as I've coined it.
Well, Ojukwu Mania may continue on because I think, like you said, it's going to be a battle. And I think, as Brian Callahan said today, and we have a little bit more about that right tackle race later in the show, it's going to be a battle for, he even said maybe even until week 1. Like, he may not claim a starter until then. Let's maybe move on to someone who had a little bit more positive news and may have quieted the doubters just a little bit today. Tvondre Sweat, I think, was another big story, and we knew that it was going to be a big question asked today. And as Kenneth says in the comments here, Tvondre Sweat, full go. Let's hopefully put all this negativity behind us. Here's what Brian Callahan had to say.
It's good. He looks ready to roll. Don't expect any issues as we get started. He should be dressed and practicing.
And so with that, that's great news. Tvondre Sweat, finally good to go. It didn't feel like there was even an ounce of, of not being confident, of doubt that Tvondre Sweat would be out there, I think.
Well, hang on there, JT, because he did say he's ready to roll. And what rolls? Round things. Secret dig at Tvondre Sweat from Brian Callahan?
Could he be out there just to roll? I don't know. But I think it does bring up an interesting point here with Tvondre Sweat, assuming that he is going to be doing more than rolling out there, assuming he's going to be ready to go out there on the field as well. I think it brings back a welcomed addition to the rotation here with the defensive line. And I think that as we've looked at OTAs so far and we've gone through the offseason, there's been a lot of us who've questioned, do they have enough up front? And I think that is just because there has been a 300-pound hole that we just don't see him out there. So therefore we don't recognize that they have this guy, in the chamber ready to go whenever he is fully healthy. And so when you talk about it, it's kind of funny that coming into training camp, Tvondre Sweat can kind of already be the reinforcements that they may need in this offense, because finally getting to see him out there with Jeffrey Simmons and a lot of these other guys who are fighting for some spots. Sebastian Joseph Day, you look at his former teammate Keandre Coburn, you look at Quinton Bohanna, who apparently, we keep talking about who is Quinton Bohanna, but apparently his nickname is Big Q in the training room, in the locker room. I don't know. He must be doing something right to get a nickname like that, but he's still in the mix as well after being brought in last season. But do you think that Tvondre Sweat is enough for this defensive line to go into training camp feeling good about the position? Because there were some other questions outside of Tvondre Sweat today about could they potentially bring in some more help? And Paul Kaharski brought up an interesting option, Carl Lawson, who has a lot of history with Brian Callahan. He asked Callahan if he knew if he was healthy or could be an option. To Brian said, I don't really know. I'm focusing on my team, which I think is a very fair and valid point. But it does bring up, could that be a potential option, or is it a necessary option for them to go out and get?
So I really liked Carl Lawson when he was due for his big money contract, the second contract, and I was hoping the Titans would sign him back then. I honestly haven't watched a lot of his tape in recent years, but checking with people that I trust, the conversation has been not quite the same as he used to be. If he can stay healthy, he can still be a pretty strong contributor. I am worried about the depth of this defensive line because I think they are going to be putting a lot on Jeffrey Simmons and Tvondre Sweat. And I apologize, my ring light literally just goes out in the middle of a show. Now it's like I'm recording from my closet somewhere. But I do worry about the depth there because I think they're putting a lot of pressure on Jeffrey Simmons, who, as good as he is, struggled to stay healthy over the last couple of seasons. I think Tvondre Sweat facing questions going into the season. I think you're putting a lot on those two players specifically. I like Sebastian Joseph Day quite a bit. I think he could be a pretty good sub for Jeff when Jeff comes off the field. Not saying he is Jeffrey Simmons, but I think he's a similar style player, like really good first step, strong hands, control the frame, that sort of deal. Just move dudes out of the way and get inside. I think he can be that type. But outside of those three guys, I think there are some major question marks. I think Coburn's probably the best of the bunch. The way I would have it right now would be Sweat and Simmons as your top two in the middle, and then I would have Joseph Day and Coburn behind those two. Marlon Davidson, I think, has played some meaningful reps for the Titans, but he gets kind of pushed around a little bit, washed out against the run. I really like Isaiah Eaton. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name or not. The kid from Rutgers, an undrafted free agent. And we heard Rand and Anthony Robinson talk about the importance of finding those undrafted guys in today's press conference as well. And he's a guy that I kind of circle where the talent and the potential meet the opportunity. I think he could be a surprise guy that makes this roster and play some this year because they need depth and because he does have the athleticism and the talent to do more than he was asked to do at Rutgers. So I worry about the depth. I think there are some interesting pieces there. I would certainly be on board if they wanted to add Carl Lawson to this rotation.
It's certainly an interesting option, and it's one that I think we continue to come back to because of the loss of Danico Autry and his 13 odd or so on sacks. Like that is still a big hole, and that's something that I think Jeffrey Simmons and Tvondre Sweat are going to have to fill. So it's an interesting option, and they didn't leave out the possibility of possibly adding more talent, but we'll get to that in just a second. Moving on to, maybe the most important position on the team, Will Levis, and what he has been up to the past couple of weeks since we've been at OTAs. This is a big storyline that I think I've been following and really want to see pay off, in some form or fashion once we get to training camp and the actual practices starting tomorrow. What has Will Levis been up to since OTAs? It's kind of a callback to Brian Callahan and what he said earlier on that said, OTAs in this offseason is really for Will Levis to start tweaking some things and putting some things together so that when we get to training camp, he can, be fully ready to take on this role as the number one starter and the guy for the Tennessee Titans. And so we asked Rand Carthon and Brian Callahan about what you've seen from Will Levis since the break in the offseason here, and how was that going to translate to training camp? And here's what they had to say.
I think he was great. He's growing as a leader, finding his voice, being empowered, just in terms of what the coaches allow him to do and what he's been asked to do. My only drawback from this offseason with him was that I didn't get invited to Cabo. So that was my only beef with Will and what he's done this offseason.
Significantly different? No, but it does change. I mean, that's an accurate observation, is that, now we're getting ready to go play. And a lot more of it is about making sure that our offense and our team is ready to go play football. And so there's a little bit less of the experimenting and the tweaking and more about trying to really dial in and lock down the details and the expectations of the position and the job. And there's still some room for, some experimentation and but by this point, by the time we really get going, we need to be ready to play football, and it's less about those experimentations. Now, that's not to say that there's not work and technique and all those things over the course of an entire season, but the focus does change a little bit.
And so I think that's an important answer to kind of come back to here. One, I think it says a lot from Rand Carthon to see how Will Levis has become more of a leader. I think that's something that you really wanted to see out of him as now the starter. And I think something you could probably expect this upcoming season. As we know, we talk about how hard it was last season for Will Levis to fall into the second round, potentially and pretty much start as the third quarterback on the roster last year, not really having a off-season routine. And now coming into this season where, you're looking at this morning on Instagram stories that Will Levis was the first one in the building. It's setting an example, I think, that we really wanted to see from Will Levis and what kind of person he can be, because we saw the kind of passion and fire last year in spurts out of Will Levis and what he could be as a leader for this team. And I think we're starting to see more of that, between the trips to Cabo and the workouts they're doing at Vanderbilt during the week. And now getting the praise from both Rand Carthon and the confidence from Brian Callahan to say, look, yeah, we did a lot of tweaking, but now it's really time for the install and to get this offense, working together as one unit. And I think that's where that leadership could really help out.
Yeah, and I think it's another milestone to monitor on his development as a quarterback. I think at this point in the year, you've seen exactly what you want to see out of Will Levis. It's not just the stuff on the field, but it's the initiative to really step up, to want to be the leader of this offense and to actually get to that point. I'm kind of with Rand though. Like, I kind of want to go to Cabo too. Like, let's take the hot read. Let's take football and other F words. Let's take Stacking the Inbox, Broadway Sports, 440 Sports, all down to Cabo. Let's make it an annual thing. We can do live reaction shows. Everybody wins. Everybody wins in that situation. But if I knew that all it would take to get to rally the troops was a trip to Cabo, I'd have all the boys on the plane right now, because this is it's just awesome. It's just awesome to see.
It's a breath of fresh air, I think, from Titan teams of old. They haven't had this in a while. You think of the Ryan Tannehill teams, it never really was like that under the Vrabel regime. Also talking about how it's different this year. There aren't any off-season awards, so none of the players can be cursed before the season even starts, because Brian Callahan isn't even doing that anymore. So I think it's a different it's a shift, and it also shows the youth that Will Levis can bring to this team, despite having some, a rather veteran core of offensive skill position players. So I think it's a really good mix here. And the biggest question left over is that I think we're starting to see the pieces fall into place for Will Levis to be a leader on this team. It's time for the results. And that's what I'm going to be paying attention to this week at training camp and beyond. But besides him being a leader and looking the part, I want to see what Brian is talking about. I want to see more of him being able to execute a lot better than he did at OTAs, because you're no longer, throwing different ways or tweaking things from play to play. Now you have to be pretty set in your ways for how you want to throw the ball. And like you said, there's always room to, to tweak some things and to always develop, but it's time to put that stuff in the rear view mirror, because it's like you said, it's go time. You're playing games soon. There's no time in the middle of a game when you got pass rushers coming at you to, work on your ball technique. And I think that's something that we definitely need to see from Will Levis early and often in training camp.
I also thought it was really interesting that Callahan brought up trust and said, essentially, now is the time to be making those mistakes, to be taking those risks. And you just trust that in a meaningful game situation, he's not going to make those same decisions. But all you really have to go off of is the faith that he'll make the right call, because at the practice, you can pull him aside and say, why'd you do that? You're not going to do that in a game, are you? But it comes down to belief, and you're never going to get that answer until he's out on the field taking live rounds.
All righty, let's move back to the right tackle conversation here, which I think is, I think there was an NFL article that came out that listed the 24 biggest battles across the NFL. And I believe the Titans right tackle position came in at number 19 on that list. I forget who wrote the article, but it was over at NFL.com. This is, protecting your quarterback, who you're putting a lot of faith and trust into this upcoming season, is a big responsibility for this right side of the line. And I think Brian doubled down and had some really interesting comments on the battle that will take place this upcoming season in training camp, and maybe even into the season. This is what he had to say on the matter.
Those are going to be real. Those are real battles. I mean, those are real position battles, and they are open. So it's going to go probably the length of training camp. We'll probably declare at some point. If I won't hear who's going to start there until the opening game, to be honest. And that's the fair way to do it, because I think we got players that are capable. Guys are going to compete, and I think the competition raises the level of performance. And so those will be open jobs. That's a competition. Who you see out there the first day, may not be who you see there the second day, and they're going to rotate and have equal opportunity.
And so I think that's exactly what we've seen from OTAs already. Bill Callahan has really enjoyed rotating people in and out and seeing, in his great offensive line mind, just trying to put the pieces together and see which one fits the best. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see here. And so for good news for you, Stoney, it doesn't seem like, unless there's going to be a disastrous injury, which we don't want to happen, but outside of those forces that you cannot control, it seems like there's not going to be a time during this training camp where the John Ojukwu train ever loses steam. It seems like it's going to go all the way up to the buzzer, so you can keep hope for the entirety of training camp.
Man, it's going to be so good for the brand if we get to Chicago and their trots John Ojukwu out at right tackle and be like, see, I told you guys all along. I think it's interesting that he made sure to include right guard in those comments as well, because I had pretty much chalked it up that Sadiq Charles was going to be this team's right guard. It's nothing really against Dylan Radins. They've stated this offseason that they see him as a guard. I think he's more athletic than Sadiq Charles, but I feel like Sadiq Charles has an element of power to his game that Radins might not have. And I think in this new gap scheme under Bill Callahan, I feel like Charles is more tailor-made for what he wants to run. And I thought that gave him the leg up pretty clearly. Like I believe I said on Football and Other F Words not too long ago, Charles is going to be the starting right guard. But it sounds like things are a little more open there. And yes, Chef Rand brings up Daniel Brunskill as well, who has experience there at right guard, played pretty well for this team last season. I kind of think he's going to be the backup center, though. I don't know if he's going to be in the fold at right guard. So what did you think about that and that race?
Yeah, and I think that it's unfortunate that the guard position kind of gets put to the wayside because we put so much emphasis on tackle. It seems like the last couple of years for the Titans, it's like the offensive line has been so bad for the last 2 years, but it's always because the first domino to fall, which is the most important one, is the tackles on the two sides, and so then it's like guard is whatever. But no, it's just as big of a battle there. I think you really can chalk it up to 3 or 4 guys. I think, like you said, Sadiq Charles is probably in the pole position there if we're kind of just ranking them right now, because he was the guy they go out and sign in free agency along with their other big gets early on, has the connection to Bill Callahan, some guy that he knows and he trusts already. But then I think you also have to, like you said, it's not out of the possibility that Dylan Radins is able to kind of, finally shifting fully to that guard style after playing multiple positions on this team over the past couple of years. Between that and also just bulking up and looking more of the part, I think, from OTAs, I think he's got a decent shot. And like you said, you can't really count out Daniel Brunskill either in this conversation. He played the position last year, and despite them still probably needing some depth at the center position and maybe possibly kind of moving him to be that, he still was able to play. He probably was one of, if not the best offensive lineman that they had last year on that line. So I think he can continue to play at that level if they see that he may be the best option there. But as Callahan also said, you need all your linemen, which is unfortunate in football nowadays. You need all of them. So either way, I think all these guys are going to find a role on this team. It just depends who ends up starting week 1, which sounds like we're not going to really know until week 1. So that'll be a fun race to watch. And now we can move on to some other things about how Brian Callahan views this team, kind of expectations for this team, and some other things that we brought up with Brian Callahan and Rand Carthen today. The first one is about load management and kind of talking about both L'Jarius Sneed and some of these other veteran guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Jeffrey Simmons, these guys who, are not going to be out there busting their butts every single day of practice, because they're pretty solid in their position on this team. They've got it good. They're not in danger, but I think Brian Callahan had a really interesting answer in what it says about this new kind of health and management team that the Titans have put together in this new regime. So here's what he had to say about that.
Some of it's injury related or coming off of injuries. That's a training staff That's Todd and his crew kind of advising on when those guys might need to be pulled back. We also manage loads off of the GPS and the strength staff, so they manage all that in the sports science part on how many yards are running, how many full speed yards, what the accelerations and decelerations are. Those things all get factored in. Sometimes a guy will come, you'll end up in, maybe the third period of practice and he'll have sort of redlined, if you will, on some of that GPS stuff. And Zach will come over and say, hey, he's done for the day. And then we shut him down. So there's a science part of it that's tracked. There's an injury part of it from the training room. And then sometimes it's just a good old fashioned guy needs a break, but for the most part, we try to base as much as we can off of whatever data we've received and what our training staff sees in the rehab processes.
So that's a really interesting one, because if you would have told me that would have come out of someone's mouth at a Titans press conference over 365 days ago, I wouldn't have believed you. It's really interesting to see how they've kind of embraced the analytical side, especially in the medical portion of the game, with a lot of guys on this team who, bring some of that risk/reward with them in the injury department. L'Jarius Sneed, who they touched on as well, saying that he's going to basically be on the same program he was in Kansas City because it works for him. He didn't miss any games or any time at all last season. Therefore, why would we change that? We have a plan that works for him. Even though you're not going to see him out there, you got to trust us that, we're doing what we need to do so that he can play in the meaningful games and not just on a random Thursday in training camp. But I think he does bring up an interesting point that this can kind of give you some more optimism for some of these guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, who have had some injury, history. Guys like Jamal Adams, who I think is a big question mark. It kind of gives us a little bit more trust and faith here that this team is going to be able to manage them, to have them effectively help out in these games that actually matter.
Well, I think anytime you have more information, you can make better decisions. And this allows them to do it on a case-by-case basis where they can look at the player and they may need to pull him from a practice. They may need to keep a closer eye on somebody. This is further integration of science and sport, man. This is like cutting edge stuff. I assume it's cutting edge stuff. This could have been in the league for the last 10 years, and we Titans fans. Yeah. we don't know. But I too was enthralled by that. Just like my jaw almost hit the floor when he was openly talking about that. And it's such a breath of fresh air. And I don't mean to keep piling on the previous coach, but this is just such a welcome change of pace for a press conference that we're actually, think about it. Like, we're making an entire show. We're 42 minutes in just talking about the press conferences today. Don't know that we would have gotten that in the
I think last year we would have made it to minute 35 and we would have said, are we is that all we have to say about Dr. Gibby winning offseason award? Do we have anything else to talk about besides that? Otis Reese, could be a sexy option this year. He won the award last year, one of the Mike Vrabel offseason awards last year. I think it's interesting, and it shows the new direction that this team is going.
Yeah, and just the willingness to actually share it with the press, with the media, so that we can ultimately relay this to Titans fans, and we can have more thorough, deeper conversations. And I think I don't want to get on a sappy soapbox here, but I think this is how you build connections with your fans. And I think this is the kind of thing that's really going to endear the sickos that are watching the press conferences and keeping up with all the tweets. Like, this is going to endear Brian Callahan to those guys. Maybe he's playing a little bit of 4D chess here. He's just like, man, if I give these people so much and they just learn to love me, then they'll never ask me a bad question in my life. I don't know. But I'm going to take it.
There are some people there who I don't think they would really care. I think they're going to ask the questions they want. But I think that's fair. I think it's a breath of fresh air. And before we move on, we do have some news to break here, I think.
We do?
Did they
sign Carl Lawson?
No, they did not sign Carl Lawson, but at Easton Freeze, he just announced 19 minutes ago that it is indeed baby time from his Twitter.
Wow.
So
how about that?
So we're going to continue moving on here as Easton has a child. We're going to talk about playing in the preseason and expectations for this team. Clearly, the more superior and more important thing going on right now. Brian Callahan, I think, had some interesting thoughts today about the preseason and how they're going to attack that. I think he did make sure to note that, in some form or fashion, that the starters are going to play some meaningful snaps in the preseason because of how new a lot of the players are in the scheme, and just everything has not really been coming together yet. And they're going to need the preseason to make sure that it all meshes. And I think that was very important from him to say that today. He wouldn't go as so far as to commit, they're going to play this much, this game, whatever. Right. But he said that most of the starters are going to get some snaps in all 3 games. And especially going up against some of those matchups, I think it might make some really entertaining preseason football upcoming. But then he went on to talk. We kind of asked him about the expectations of being a first-year head coach, and are you setting those for yourself in your first year, or what is your main message and goal for your first year as the head coach? And this is what he had to say.
I try not to look too far ahead, but I would like to see an efficient offense, an offense that looks like we know what we're doing. The style of defense, you want guys to play within the scheme. You want to see the competitive nature, the attitude that we're looking for, the soundness of the scheme. I think that we're going to be a really competitive football team, and to put a number on wins or losses or expectations, I think a lot of it still remains to be seen. We have a lot of work to do to get to that point, and I'm excited about the work and the process to get there. And I want to see us get better every day ultimately. And it's a cliche and it's a coach speak answer. I understand that, but that's the truth, really. I mean, I haven't gone much past my meetings this afternoon. I have to get ready for. So I'll let you guys determine what success looks like.
Man, we're looking at.
And as Zach says in the comments, it is Dada time. It is time for Dada Easton.
Nice little
what a callback. Yeah, right. If you're a longtime listener of the Hot Read podcast and the 440 Sports Network, you know of the legend of Dada Easton. But I think that answer was really, even though he calls it a coach speak answer, it was very much clear to me his first part. He felt very passionate about, if there's one thing I want to get right this year in my first year, it's having a successful offense. And I think that stems from him, being behind a Zach Taylor, kind of front facing offense where we continue to kind of peel back the layers and see how involved Brian Callahan was in that, in the creation of their scheme and their play calling. And I think that really spoke today that because that is on the top priority, it kind of feels to me that Brian Callahan wants to silence the doubters and say, it wasn't just because I was in with Zach Taylor and we had Joe Burrow. No, I can really run an offense, and I can be a play caller, and I can be one of the best in the league. And I think that is, if you're a Titans fan, you really, if there's anything you want to see out of this season, it's probably this, winning is nice, but with the team the way it is, seeing the success of Will Levis and having like a top 15 above league average offense is probably the next best thing, and something that you haven't seen in a long time.
Well, I think it reflects a deep understanding of what is successful in the NFL as well. I think Brian Callahan is not trying to force a square peg in a round hole and saying, while everybody's going to zig, we're going to zag. It's no, let's go get some horses. Let's get some thoroughbreds. Let's revamp, add some juice to this offense. And if we can execute on it, and if we are an efficient unit, and if we do make plays and we can pass the ball, run the ball, if we're unpredictable, if we're multiple, if we're doing everything that the other successful offenses in the NFL are doing, we are going to be successful as they are as well. And I tip my cap to that. The question I had for you as a resident Bengals fan, do you know if Cincinnati under Zach Taylor played guys in the preseason as well? Is this Brian borrowing from that system, or is this Brian branching out and doing something different? Because if they did play guys, I think it's interesting to note the Titans fans will quickly grab that and they'll say, oh, well, under Mike Vrabel, the Titans sucked in week 1 and it's obvious they didn't get any practice. But I mean, the Bengals aren't exactly fast starters under Zach Taylor the last couple of seasons as well. So what's really the impact? And that's the reason I would ask you if you knew.
Well, I think definitely it's a deviation from the Bengals. I
Okay.
think first off, because I can remember last year, I believe I went to a Bengals Packers game where, you know, Trevor Siemian had his like 2-week stint with the Bengals and ended up starting that game with Andre Yosevas and Charlie Jones as his wide receiver 1 and 2 in that game, right? So, you know, and they got absolutely steamrolled by Sean Clifford in that game. So I guess,
Yeah.
former alumni of my high school, so me and Sean Clifford, but but
About that.
they weren't rolling a lot out there. But I think it is also kind of different circumstances. You look at that with the Bengals last offseason, you had Joe Burrow hurt through all of training camp and was still kind of recovering at that point, something that they didn't want to rush back. And also it was just more of a put together team, right? This Titans team couldn't be farther from gelling and meshing. They might be the least the team with the least chemistry right now because of how many just different parts they've kind of in this Brian Callahan new system have kind of tried to force together, and it's going to take some time to mesh. And so whether or not Brian Callahan wants to play these guys or not, I don't really think he has a choice because it's really just not a factor of if they can. It's when will this team start meshing, and I think it's important for them to start meshing as soon as possible, even if that's a drive or two in the preseason games.
And Zach has our backs in the comments there, saying the Bengals did not play their starters. Somewhere, not today, Callahan said this is why they'll play, and I typically tend to agree in that philosophy that, I mean, you can't just not play guys and get them no work whatsoever and expect it to go well. And we've seen the results of that. Week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals immediately comes to mind. So I'm for it. Like, get the guys out there, get them good and loose. And man, I'm trying really hard not to make any dirty jokes because I respect the Hot Read brand so much. But get them out there and stretch it.
Yeah, get them loose. Get them. Start molding the clay, I guess you could say.
Get some work
what you can do with this team. The last one in this group of clips here to talk about is, I think, interesting to talk. There were some things said today in this press conference that seemed a lot different, but also made some callbacks to maybe seasons of old. And this was discussing Rand Carthon and Brian Callahan's kind of viewpoint on who gets the final say over the 53-man roster during training camp. Like, where's that going to come from? And I think, if you do have PTSD to last offseason, you may want to cover your ears for this. You may hear some buzzwords that you may not like. But here's what Rand Carthon had to say about who's going to get the final say.
Other people at all positions. We were just talking, about bringing some guys in just to kick some tires and, see where guys are. Our roster isn't set. Obviously, we don't have to have the roster set till September. So we're always looking to improve at every position.
And so on top of that, I think this was another very interesting point. It doesn't seem like the Titans may be done. We talk about the even signing Jamal Adams, the possibility that they could bring in another safety because Jamal Adams doesn't really fit the exact bill of what they want to do. I guess with that safety position right now, with the talent they still have, you also talk about what we talked about earlier with the defensive line or the linebacking position. And so Rand Carthon made a pretty interesting statement today, both on this front that he's talked to a few GMs about, this is where we're thin on the roster and this is where we are full on the roster. Is there a possibility? He talked about, is there a possibility on the trade market, or because they have the 7th claim in waivers, they may look to use that to their advantage. So I would not rule out the possibility of the Titans still adding people once training camp gets into full swing. And then he talked about, that the 53-man, I thought this was the clip, but this was more about what he was talking about adding players, but who gets final say over the 53-man roster? He called it a collaborative effort and said that might be a buzzword that you do not want to hear, but it seems like we're going to work on this together, but ultimately it is Brian's team. He says, my work is, kind of joked and said, it's your time, Brian. Like I've done all I can to make this roster work. Now it's in your hands. So I think they will still be, it seems a little bit more civil than years past, and there may have been some allusions. There may be some alluding to years past with Rand Carthon.
Maybe he heard that
some of the staff, but I think that is interesting to see if, once they start getting into training camp, right, and you have these guys, and it just seems that it's not working, and some things still feel a little flat with this team in some areas. Do they start hitting that waiver market in the trade, they hitting the phones hard? That'll be an interesting idea or story.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Anthony Robinson flat out said this. I'm sorry if you said this. You cut out on me there for a minute,
no
so I don't know if you said it or not. But he talked about like being willing to make the roster decisions as you go and kind of see how things are playing out in camp. And I think that's probably the right way to approach this thing. I don't know. What talent pool is out there right now, and you would think, if you really want that position, you can go get it right now, but you don't know what's going to open up. Maybe you think you're okay. Maybe you give some of the young guys a chance to prove themselves. I think it's probably best to just roll with the punches and adapt to the needs of the team as they evolve. And I keep saying I don't want to dogpile the previous regime, but you like the honesty and how refreshing it is from this regime.
Yeah, I do agree. 2 more clips here before we get out of here. The first one here is about one of those players they just signed, Jamal Adams. Obviously, this was the first time we got the chance to talk to either Brian Callahan or Rand Carthon since Jamal Adams was signed by the team. This is what he had to say about the safety.
Mentality that Jamal brings when he plays. He fits the system that Denard needs. We needed some pieces at safety. He's really versatile. He can do a lot of different things. He's played some big nickel packages. He's played some dime linebacker. We'll explore those roles for him as camp gets going, but he's got a really versatile ability to help the defense in a lot of different ways. And then, the mentality that he plays with is unique and it's fun, and we need that on our defense as well. So excited to have him on board. Obviously, we haven't had a chance to take a look at him yet. It'll be my first time as a Titan. Obviously, I've played against him for a couple of different times, and he's a real problem, and he's had battled some injuries as of late, but excited to have him here.
And so I think it was interesting that not only did he call out the Denard Wilson connection there, but then even after this, he talked about, having that connection with Steven Jackson, the DB's coach, and just feeling like this fit is going to work. And Rand Carthon doubled down on that, saying this was a prove it deal for us to give him, and he wanted a prove it deal. This feels like what Jamal Adams wanted, and it was just the right fit. So it seems like, and it's kind of what we've been talking about, even though he doesn't really fit the ideal piece that they needed on this defense at the safety position, we talked about, hey, could we see Jamal Adams probably play in some packages where he is that coverage linebacker, or playing these multiple different versatile positions on the defense here. And as Brian alludes there, that, they're going to explore all options for Jamal Adams on this defense.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting that the first thing that he mentioned was the word mentality. And then he expanded upon that by talking about the familiarity with Denard Wilson as well. You see it still on Jamal Adams tape. I mean, people can say what they want about the guy, the injuries, the limitations from a speed, athletic standpoint, but the guy is a dog, and kind of makes you wonder if they felt like they really needed to inject some of that into the secondary a little bit, and maybe get another guy, another voice in the room that can bark like a dog.
He definitely fits the Denard Wilson style. That's kind of why he got his claim to fame and was a all-pro under that Denard Wilson led safeties group in New York with the Jets. So I think as much as the player has his limitations, I think he fits what Denard Wilson wants to do. And as Chef Rand says in the comments there, blitz, baby, blitz. It's like, dude, it seems like sometimes that this offense is kind of revving up to be L'Jarius Sneed, Cheeto, and Roger McCreary just try to jam the wide receivers as hard as they can on the line and then just send the house with everybody else and see what happens. And that aggressive style of defense, it's high risk, high reward sometimes, but it seems like it's those little pieces Denard Wilson has picked up along the way, from the aggressiveness to try to make turnovers in Baltimore to that blitzing style that he kind of picked up with the Philadelphia Eagles. It seems like he's creating this new and unique defensive scheme that only works if you have the right dogs to play it. And it seems Denard Wilson, between L'Jarius Sneed and Jamal Adams and a lot of these guys, they're picking up some really aggressive players.
Man, I can't wait to see it unfold this fall, because I, like a lot of people, I'll hold my hand up. Like when I first heard the news that they had signed Kenneth Murray, when I first heard the news that they had signed Jamal Adams, I wasn't all that thrilled about it. But as I watch more tape and I kind of see, like, they're not going to ask Jamal Adams to go back there and be the center field safety and cover anybody that comes through a zone. I don't think they want situations where Jamal Adams is one-on-one with like Zay Flowers or something like that. I don't think
we don't need to know. Yeah, it's an interesting point, right? Because their other option was what they had last year in Jack Gibbons playing on Zay Flowers. So it's like, it still doesn't fix the problem, but you're interested to see that, will they be able to maybe circumvent that through kind of a different scheme with the personnel they have now?
It's like with Kenneth Murray, I don't think you want him out there one-on-one with Christian McCaffrey or Travis Kelce or something like that. But the more you watch of these guys and the more you hear the coaches talk about how they view these players, you start thinking like, man, they can send Kenneth Murray up a gap and pressure a quarterback. They can blitz Jamal Adams. Like, these dudes, you might not be excited about the signings at first, but I think part of that is projecting them to fill a need that the Titans aren't looking at them to fill, if that makes sense. I think they're going to be specialized roles, and I think they're both going to be heat-seeking missiles. And you hear, like Chef Rand said, blitz, baby, blitz. I mean, this is going to be a defense that you have the secondary locking down that part of the field, and then it is just predicated on pressure. That's how the Baltimore Ravens defense has worked so well for all these years. And if Denard Wilson is going to borrow from that philosophy, then it is going to mean simulated pressure, getting to the quarterback however you can, and locking down the outsides. And sounds pretty nice to me.
Yeah, I agree. All right, the last clip that we have here before we get out, some odds and ends at the end here. But I think this one is really interesting, and it revolves around a player who has had an up and down offseason so far, and that's Treylon Burks from the he's running over like 2,000 yards or whatever in one practice. He's leading to, oh my God, he's running. He's the gunner on punt. He has had an up and down offseason media-wise. And so with the additions of the 3 wide receivers above Treylon right now, this offseason, we asked Rand Carthon about Treylon Burks' role and how he's handling kind of everything that's going on around him. And here's what he had to say.
He sent us a picture, during the offseason, this little break here, showing his new physique. He came in and he really took to heart the conversation that he had with myself and with Coach Keeley, and he's completely bought in. I've messaged with him throughout the off season, and I think he's in a really good spot. And again, we added Tyler, we added Calvin. Obviously D-Hop was here, but for a young guy like that, he has vets that he can learn from. And again, with him and his size and his speed and his explosiveness, and now, he can be an X, he can be a Z. Tyler's primary spot is probably going to be the F. You know what I mean? So I'm expecting, things from him and just his unselfishness. I know it was some talk about him taking gunner reps, but that was because he wanted to, and he wants to prove that he can stay healthy and play top level.
And so I think that's really important, that last note there. It's kind of been Brian Callahan's philosophy this entire time. If you make the roster, you're going to have to find a place to contribute, whether it is on special teams or on the offense or defense. And I think that says a lot about Treylon Burks as a guy who's kind of been pushed out, not too far removed from being a first-round pick, as a guy who still knows kind of where he's at right now in his career and wants to make the most out of it. So him volunteering to kind of take some of those gunner reps, I think shows a lot about Treylon. And before the clip started, it got a little bit cut off. Rand talked about him, kind of growing up and kind of maturing into what it is to be a NFL veteran almost, 3 years into the league. It's getting pretty close to calling Treylon Burks a veteran.
Yeah.
Only a year or two away about. But I think it still, shows that there is a role on this team for Treylon Burks. It may not be the role that we all envisioned 2.5 years ago, but they have a good understanding of who he is right now with this team. And I think it comes back to the philosophy that this year is kind of a prove it. Can he be, a serviceable wide receiver too, in case they do not end up re-signing DeAndre Hopkins or, Tyler Boyd on the 1-year deal? Can he be a throughout the rest of his contract? And I think that's kind of what they're setting out to prove. And Chef Rand says in the comments, sending Rand them progress picks. Well, we don't, it's not just that he got the progress picks. This was something that we found, I guess Easton said, we got to show the picks today. And so Treylon looks totally different. This is, for reference, this is what Treylon looked like last training camp or, earlier last season. Mm-hmm. This is on his eye. This is on his Instagram. Dude is jacked now. And so like when Rand says that he is making some progress, I mean, he looks totally different. He looks, I didn't know that a big and fast receiver could get bigger, and probably faster, but here we are. Yeah. He's doing his thing. So I think that, it's good to not set the expectations for Treylon Burks. Everyone knows you look your best in a Hooters bathroom. I think it's really interesting that you could identify that was indeed a Hooters bathroom. I don't know if it was, but if it is, good job. That's some detective work right there for sure. I think
I've been in my fair share of Hooters bathrooms in my day. It looks pretty spot on.
Looks pretty spot on. But I think it really is important to set the expectations right now with Treylon where they are, which is it's a happy surprise if he is able to contribute to this team. And I think that, there, as he kind of alluded, that, Calvin and DeAndre Hopkins are going to play the X and they're going to play the X and Z roles mainly on this team. But it doesn't mean that Treylon Burks won't get some looks specifically designed for him to maybe come in and, kind of bring that change of pace that to a Calvin Ridley style X, where he's just burning down the field, hoping to get by the guy and see if it works like that. And so I think that's really interesting to see. And it's going to be interesting to see how Treylon kind of responds to that this offseason or this training camp.
Well, I think a fresh start has been good for him. And it sounds like maybe Rand Carthon got in his ear a little bit and told him, like, hey, we got to get serious about asserting ourselves here. When you are drafted in the NFL, that hourglass immediately flips over and you only get so many games, so many reps, so many seasons before a franchise will move on from you. And I think we were approaching that territory with Burks. And I'm a big Burks fan. Don't get me wrong. I mean, hand up, I had him as wide receiver 1 in his draft class. I really liked his potential. Big-bodied, strong wide receiver that could make people miss or run through people with the ball in his hand in the open field, that kind of wide receiver. The comparisons were A.J. Brown coming out of the draft, Deebo Samuel. I mean, everybody's compared to those two guys, it feels like, over the last couple of years. But with Burks, I really did see a little bit of that in the open field, and the Titans just haven't been able to harness that yet. Now, whether or not that's because previous coaching staffs were kind of quick to give up on him and not put him in position to succeed, don't know. All we know is, the rumors swirling around. So I think it's been good for him to get with a new staff that has prioritized the passing game. It's kind of given him a new lease on life, so to speak. And from the Titans end, I think they've done a great job of positioning themselves so that it doesn't really matter if he doesn't pan out. I mean, at this point, you've got your Ridley, your Hopkins, and your Boyd that are probably going to be getting the brunt of the receiving work. You throw in the 2 tight ends, you throw in Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, and that. Anything they get out of Burks is just icing on the cake. And if he can be a factor on special teams, you're going to buy yourself back into the good graces of this coaching staff and see your way onto the field. So I'm all for it, man. I hope Burks is able to really turn it around and this fresh start leads to productivity on the field.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Also, I think that's yes.
Well, hang on. I just want to say, okay. Zach, if Zach is still watching, he's going to be thrilled that I finally bought the dongle to plug my webcam that he gave me in. So my camera's a little bit better quality now.
Oh, nice. Very
nice.
But
it happens on the same day my ring light just goes out for no reason. So now I have in the middle of a show. Yeah. So
hey, you know what? We got through it, and we, talked about an hour and change of ball here. And, we're out here talking ball and Easton's having babies. So, it's always a good time with you, Stoney. Thank you for filling in for Easton. Oh, yes.
Zach, that wasn't my one more thing. This is my one more thing.
Okay.
Brian Callahan talking about the tight end room was pretty glowing.
So I wanted, there was going to be my odds and ends, but since we already got to an hour, I was like, if I bring this up, if I say something, we're going to go on a 45-minute rant about how me and Stoney are kind of cooking with our theory about the 12 personnel and double back field. Like we go on forever, and maybe we will when we start to see them put the ideas to paper on the training camp field. So that'll be very interesting.
I just want people to be paying attention. That's all. We talked about it 2 weeks ago at memos, and now Brian Callahan's talking about the tight end room and press conferences. Yep. Just saying.
Yep.
It's out there.
Well, Stoney, like I said, thank you for filling in today. Always fun talking with you. We got a lot going on here, with both this show, but then also Stacking the Inbox, your show, the Unofficial Titans Podcast. Let the people know what you've been up to and what they can look forward to as we get into the training camp here.
Yeah, well, Jake in the comments, I want to apologize. We never got to the Kyle Phillips talk, but we're going to have to leave that on the cutting room floor. Sorry, Jake. I got a lot of stuff on Sobros Network right now. I called Jim Harbaugh an idiot for saying Rashad Bateman's going to be a top receiver in the league.
You mean John Harbaugh, or was it a piece about Jim Harbaugh on the Chargers saying that his brother is stupid for being stupid? I was gonna be like, that's an interesting angle to take. Yeah. I'd be very interested to read the piece about how John's decision was Jim's fault. I mean, as it always is,
I mean, it's amazing what you can do when you're the editor and don't have somebody weighing in on what you're writing. And
very true. Not.
Did a podcast previewing Deadpool and Wolverine. I did a piece about teams that the window might be closing on in the NFL this season. And I wrote a guide to self-care. It's all up at SobrosNetwork.com. Of course, tomorrow I'm going to be on Football and Other F Words. I believe, unless the topic has changed, we're going to be previewing the edge rushers. And I've been watching a little Arden Key and Harold Landry tape to get caught up to speed on that. Stacking the Inbox, Film Friday. Listen, Zach might have thought I was kidding when I told him this morning. I'm doing a film piece on Dr. Gibby because I think we are being red-pilled into Jack Gibbons being the starting linebacker for this team. They keep talking about how much he's grown, how much better he's getting, and how much they love him. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to dig into the film to see what they're seeing because I don't think everybody in Titans media sees the same thing.
Well, I mean, I was one of the people trying to shake the Titans media when Gibby picked off Levis. I said, "Do not post this clip. Do not do it," and they did it anyways.
They're red pilling us. They're red pilling us into Jack Gibbons.
That's going to be a fantastic watch. I'll definitely have to circle my calendar on Friday to watch that. Yeah, we got training camp tomorrow and Thursday. I'm assuming I will be there. I'm assuming Easton will not be, so I guess just keep to my Easton, feed. And congrats to Easton. Keep to my feed and the Hot Read feed for all of the content that we will see tomorrow. It will be very exciting to be there for the first day of training camp. And then I probably will be back on Thursday. Maybe Easton and his child will make an appearance on Thursday's show. Maybe we'll have the first baby. We'll have the baby cam set up. If Easton is back by that time, I do want to do a baby cam where because Easton's office where he does the podcast is also for the time being the nursery. So
Man,
I'd be really interested. I really want to get a cam set up so that like if Easton's making a comment or something and the baby just absolutely starts crying and screaming, I want to have a baby cam because it'll be good content to add to the discussion. But
well, if you need me on Thursday, I can do 4:00. We're just planning things on the air. Whatever,
I mean,
let me know.
I'm a go with the flow guy. So, people, you'll probably see me. Maybe you'll see Stoney on 4:00 on Thursdays. We break down everything that I saw from Titans training camp on Wednesday and Thursday. And then, I mean, we're off to the races next week. And we have, I think, Saturday as well. I'll be at Nissan for the open practice at Nissan Stadium. So that'll be exciting. So, Tuesdays and Thursdays until we get closer to the season. And then we'll go back to the 3-show schedule. But I think that's where we're going to leave it off. Thank you once again, Stoney, for the 3rd time. But
anytime.
This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you guys on Thursday.